I heard the wedding bells ring before I saw the petals. The wind carried the scent of roses I hadn't ordered, drifting into the garden I once planted with my own hands. I stood behind the fence, dressed in the same suit I wore at her christening. My name wasn't on the guest list. Not even a mention in the program. My daughter was getting married, without me. But as they danced and toasted without a clue, they didn't know I owned the very ground beneath their feet, that I wasn't always this quiet shadow, standing at the edges of joy I once created. There was a time I was the first to rise, the last to sleep, and every heartbeat I had belonged to my little girl. Her name is Lydia. And once upon a time, she used to run barefoot through our hallway, calling me her super dad, laughing so hard she'd hiccup. Her mother, my Mary, passed when Lydia was just 5. A sudden stroke in her sleep. One moment she was there, humming by the kitchen sink, the next, gone. I remember holding Lydia that night, her small body trembling against mine as I lied and told her everything would be okay. But nothing was. I lost my wife, and she lost a mother. So I tried to become both. I gave up the promotion at work because it meant traveling. I didn't want Lydia to come home to an empty house. I took on a second job at the local auto shop on weekends just to keep the mortgage afloat. Nights were long. The house was quiet. I ate standing by the stove most days. My hands were always rough, my back always sore. But when I heard her laugh, it made the aches disappear. I remember sewing her school costume at 3 a.m. with trembling fingers and a YouTube tutorial. She won first place. She ran into my arms, beaming, whispering, "I told them my dad can fix anything." But time changes things. People. Priorities. She went to college out of state, first in our family to do so. I was proud. Helped pack every box. Left small notes in her bags with money folded between, pretending it came from the scholarship office. When she came back after graduation, she was different. More polished. More distant. She had a new voice, a new posture, and a new boyfriend with a family that wore matching cashmere at Christmas. I didn't fit into that world. They lived in a part of town where the lawns looked ironed and the smiles were tight. Lydia invited me for dinner once, just once, when they first got engaged. I remember her future mother-in-law looking at my calloused hands and saying, "Oh, you work with tools," like I was some antique from a working-class museum. I smiled, nodded, and said, "Yes, ma'am. And I still use them." Lydia laughed nervously. She didn't correct them when they assumed I rented my house. That's when I felt it, that quiet erosion. Not a single crack, but a slow crumble. The girl who used to braid my hair with dandelions now flinched when I hugged her in front of her new world. I told myself it was just growing pains. That she'd come back around. But every call became shorter. Every visit more awkward. She stopped bringing him to my place. And then, she stopped coming altogether. I thought maybe I'd said something wrong. Or not enough. I played back every conversation like an old tape, trying to find the static. But sometimes, people just outgrow you. Not because you changed, but because you didn't. Then one evening, I heard from Mrs. Ellison, our neighbor across the street. She said, "Oh, how exciting about Lydia's wedding next month. You must be so proud." I froze. Wedding? I hadn't received a single word. No call. No card. No conversation. I waited. I told myself the invitation must have gotten lost. Days passed. Then weeks. The mail stayed empty. So did my living room. That's when I realized something deep in my gut, something cold and quiet. I wasn't just forgotten. I had been erased. And yet, even then, I still held on to hope, until the next betrayal carved deeper than I ever expected. Because sometimes, silence isn't just avoidance, its rejection wearing its finest suit. The first betrayal. I sat on the porch that morning with a cup of tea gone cold, watching the neighbor's dog chase shadows across their fence. A faint breeze rustled the paper in my lap. It was a wedding announcement, clipped from the local lifestyle section. There she was. Lydia. My daughter. In a white dress, standing beside her fiancé, smiling that polished smile I barely recognized anymore. The headline read, "A union of two prominent families." Prominent. My name wasn't mentioned. Not even as father of the bride. Just a line about a small, private ceremony attended by close family and friends. Close family. I felt something inside me unravel. Slowly, like a thread being pulled from an old coat you've worn for decades. You don't notice it at first, but then the cold starts seeping in. I called her. Straight to voicemail. Again. Voicemail. I left one message. Just one. Lydia. I saw the announcement. I didn't know. Please call me. She never did. The next week, I drove to the cafe where she used to meet me every other Sunday. I waited. She never came. Not even a text. The waitress, who had served us for years, walked by and asked, "No daughter today, Mr. Hayes?" I forced a smile and said, "She's busy with wedding plans." The words tasted like rust. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed and looked at the framed photo of us on her high school graduation day. Her cap was crooked. She was beaming, arms around my neck. Back then, she couldn't imagine celebrating a milestone without me. So what changed? I kept asking myself, was I too old? Too simple? Too embarrassing for her new world? I remembered how her fiancé once said during dinner, "Lydia told me you were a mechanic. That's pretty blue collar. I admire that." He said it like I'd survived a war. I had. But not the kind he'd understand. I'd survived losing the love of my life. I'd survived raising a daughter alone. I'd survived late bills, empty fridges, and sitting in parking lots just to cry without her seeing. And now, I had to survive this. I still tried. I even called her office. Her secretary answered, polite and curt, "Ms. Hayes is unavailable. Would you like to leave a message?" Ms. Hayes. That's when I stopped pretending. She didn't want me there. Not at the rehearsal dinner. Not in the family photos. Not walking her down the aisle. And what hurt the most wasn't the exclusion. It was the erasure. The quiet rewriting of history where I never existed. You know, when Lydia was 8, she begged me to come to her school play. She was a tree. Didn't have a single line. But she told me, "Just wave when I look at you, okay?" I took off work, wore my only tie, and sat in the front row waving like a fool every time that tree swayed. Now, she was starring in the biggest play of her life. And I wasn't even given a seat in the back row. I went days without speaking to anyone. Just walking, thinking, remembering. Not eating much. Barely sleeping. One afternoon, I passed by the church where Mary and I got married. The doors were open, and the janitor was sweeping inside. I stepped in, sat in the last pew, and just breathed. For the first time in weeks. A small girl was helping her father carry hymnals to the front. She laughed. He smiled. A simple exchange. But it made my eyes well up. Because that used to be us. And maybe that's all I'll ever have now. The memories. The echoes. But even as I sat in that quiet sanctuary of dust and stained glass, something in me shifted. She had taken away my invitation. But she couldn't take away my story. And it wasn't over yet. If you've ever felt like your love and sacrifices were invisible to the very people you gave everything to, tell me in the comments. How did you move forward without losing yourself? Death on paper. A week before the wedding, a letter arrived in my mailbox. No return address. Just my name typed neatly on the front, like I was receiving a formal summons. I opened it slowly, my fingers trembling more from dread than age. Inside was a single page, thick paper, expensive ink. It was from Lydia's fiancé's attorney. I read it 3 times before I understood it wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a restraining order, nothing that dramatic. It was worse. It was a polite, legal notice, requesting that I respect the couple's wishes by refraining from attending the wedding or related events, as my presence may cause undue discomfort and disrupt the experience of their special day. I wasn't just uninvited. I was considered a threat to their peace. That one line sat heavy in my chest, disrupt the experience. Was that all I'd become to her? An experience to manage? A complication? The man who raised her, who stitched her costumes, who braided her hair with shaking fingers because her mother was gone, that man was now a liability in a tailored letter. It felt like dying. Not the kind with flowers and tears and graves. The kind where you're still walking, still breathing, but something inside you has been buried without a ceremony. I sat at the kitchen table for hours, the letter unfolded, beside my tea, untouched. And then I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened the box. In the attic, under dusty insulation, was a metal box where I kept the things that still hurt too much to touch. Lydia's crayon drawings. A lock of Mary's hair. The hospital bracelet from when Lydia was born. A Father's Day card she made when she was 6. Stick figures, glue, glitter. The words, "Best Dad Ever," scratched in with a pink marker. I held it all, slowly, piece by piece, until the tears came without warning. Was I still her father? Or just a ghost who haunted her past? I wanted to call her. To scream, to plead, to beg. But what would I say? Please let me attend the wedding you already decided I wasn't good enough for. I couldn't do it. But I also couldn't sit and rot. A few days later, I saw a post online. A mutual friend had shared photos of the venue. A private estate outside the city, popular among upper-class weddings. Grand hall. Rose garden. Marble floors. A place where money whispered through every brick. I recognized it. It used to be a community retreat decades ago, back when I was in my 20s. I helped build the Western Gazebo as part of a volunteer project. Back then, we poured concrete by hand and didn't think about ownership. Now it was dressed in luxury and red velvet ropes. Something strange stirred in me, not rage, but resolve. Because if they were going to cut me out of their new world, I'd make sure they remembered exactly who laid the foundation. I started asking around. Made a few phone calls to people who owed me favors from long ago. That old estate had a complicated ownership history. One of the silent investors. A man I once saved from bankruptcy when I loaned him money I never expected back. Turns out, he hadn't forgotten. He said, "You want to rent it?" I said, "No. I want to own it." He laughed at first. Then paused. Let me make a few calls. And just like that, the pieces began to move. Quietly. Legally. Without spectacle. Because I wasn't going to argue anymore. I wasn't going to beg. I was going to stand where they least expected me. And I was going to reclaim something far more powerful than an invitation. I was going to reclaim my presence. And when the music started and the guests applauded, I would be there. Not as a guest. But as the man who owned every stone beneath their feet. The final nail. The morning of the wedding arrived, and the world seemed determined to mock me with its perfection. The sky was that soft kind of blue that painters try to bottle. Birds chirped like they were part of the ceremony. I stood by my bedroom window, watching the light crawl across the hardwood floor, the same floor Lydia had learned to walk on. The same one she'd danced on, barefoot, singing songs from cartoons I can't remember the names of anymore. I was already dressed. Not in anger, not in rebellion. Just in quiet, simple dignity. Dark gray suit. Clean white shirt. The tie Lydia bought me for Father's Day when she was 10, it still had a small chocolate stain near the bottom. I left it there. And on my wrist? Mary's old watch. It no longer ticked. But I wore it anyway. At 10:14 a.m., the church bells in the distance began to ring. I didn't move. I just listened. By 10:30, my phone buzzed. A message. From Lydia. 3 words, "Please don't come." No, Dad. No explanation. Just a sentence that sliced deeper than any knife. I stared at it, the glow of the screen reflecting in my glasses. My hand didn't tremble. My heart didn't race. It was something worse, it was numb. Cold. Final. That was the moment the door finally closed in my soul. Not the day she stopped visiting. Not the day I found out from the newspaper. Not even the letter from her lawyer. This was the final nail. She knew what today was. She knew what I had given her, what I had given up for her. And she still chose silence. Still chose shame. Still chose distance. For a long moment, I didn't feel like a man. I felt like a relic. Like the dusty heirloom you quietly tuck into a drawer because it doesn't match the decor anymore. I could have stayed home. Could have drowned in the weight of my own humiliation. But I didn't. Because sometimes, dignity is not about being celebrated, it's about standing tall even when no one's clapping. I stepped outside. The air was warm. Bees floated lazily around the roses. Across the street, Mrs. Ellison was watering her plants. She waved, then looked surprised. All dressed up? I just smiled. Got a meeting. It wasn't a lie. I drove to the venue. Slowly. No music. Just the sound of tires humming and my old bones settling with every turn. When I reached the gates, the valet hesitated. Young man, slicked hair, earpiece. I rolled down the window and handed him a card. "Tell the coordinator Mr. Hayes has arrived," I said. He looked confused. Then checked the name. Then stiffened. "Yes, sir. Right away, sir." I parked myself. I didn't want anyone else touching the car Mary and I picked out 25 years ago. From a distance, I could see the ceremony setup. Ivory chairs. Flower arches. A grand piano tucked beneath the trees. And guests, dozens of them, already arriving, smiling, hugging, posing for pictures. I stayed behind the scenes. My name was now on the paperwork, tucked in legal binders, notarized and signed. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to make a scene. I just waited. And as the pianist began to play, and as Lydia walked down the aisle in her perfect dress with another man by her side, someone who hadn't changed her diapers or carried her fevered body through emergency rooms, something inside me burned. Not hate. Not even sadness. Just the pure, hollow ache of knowing you're watching a ceremony that used to live in your dreams, and now haunts your reality. But I was done begging. Done being erased. Because they could plan every detail. Control every flower, every fork, every smile in every photo. But there was one thing they couldn't control anymore. Whose name was on the deed beneath their perfect little fairy tale. And soon, they would learn what it meant to silence the wrong man. The final nail. The morning of the wedding arrived, and the world seemed determined to mock me with its perfection. The sky was that soft kind of blue that painters try to bottle. Birds chirped like they were part of the ceremony. I stood by my bedroom window, watching the light crawl across the hardwood floor, the same floor Lydia had learned to walk on. The same one she'd danced on, barefoot, singing songs from cartoons I can't remember the names of anymore. I was already dressed. Not in anger, not in rebellion. Just in quiet, simple dignity. Dark gray suit. Clean white shirt. The tie Lydia bought me for Father's Day when she was 10, it still had a small chocolate stain near the bottom. I left it there. And on my wrist? Mary's old watch. It no longer ticked. But I wore it anyway. At 10:14 a.m., the church bells in the distance began to ring. I didn't move. I just listened. By 10:30, my phone buzzed. A message. From Lydia. 3 words, "Please don't come." No, Dad. No explanation. Just a sentence that sliced deeper than any knife. I stared at it, the glow of the screen reflecting in my glasses. My hand didn't tremble. My heart didn't race. It was something worse, it was numb. Cold. Final. That was the moment the door finally closed in my soul. Not the day she stopped visiting. Not the day I found out from the newspaper. Not even the letter from her lawyer. This was the final nail. She knew what today was. She knew what I had given her, what I had given up for her. And she still chose silence. Still chose shame. Still chose distance. For a long moment, I didn't feel like a man. I felt like a relic. Like the dusty heirloom you quietly tuck into a drawer because it doesn't match the decor anymore. I could have stayed home. Could have drowned in the weight of my own humiliation. But I didn't. Because sometimes, dignity is not about being celebrated, it's about standing tall even when no one's clapping. I stepped outside. The air was warm. Bees floated lazily around the roses. Across the street, Mrs. Ellison was watering her plants. She waved, then looked surprised. All dressed up? I just smiled. Got a meeting. It wasn't a lie. I drove to the venue. Slowly. No music. Just the sound of tires humming and my old bones settling with every turn. When I reached the gates, the valet hesitated. Young man, slicked hair, earpiece. I rolled down the window and handed him a card. "Tell the coordinator Mr. Hayes has arrived," I said. He looked confused. Then checked the name. Then stiffened. "Yes, sir. Right away, sir." I parked myself. I didn't want anyone else touching the car Mary and I picked out 25 years ago. From a distance, I could see the ceremony setup. Ivory chairs. Flower arches. A grand piano tucked beneath the trees. And guests, dozens of them, already arriving, smiling, hugging, posing for pictures. I stayed behind the scenes. My name was now on the paperwork, tucked in legal binders, notarized and signed. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to make a scene. I just waited. And as the pianist began to play, and as Lydia walked down the aisle in her perfect dress with another man by her side, someone who hadn't changed her diapers or carried her fevered body through emergency rooms, something inside me burned. Not hate. Not even sadness. Just the pure, hollow ache of knowing you're watching a ceremony that used to live in your dreams, and now haunts your reality. But I was done begging. Done being erased. Because they could plan every detail. Control every flower, every fork, every smile in every photo. But there was one thing they couldn't control anymore. Whose name was on the deed beneath their perfect little fairy tale. And soon, they would learn what it meant to silence the wrong man. A ghost with a plan. They moved like clockwork, ushers guiding guests, photographers clicking away, waitstaff balancing glasses of champagne on silver trays. The air buzzed with celebration. But no one noticed the man in the gray suit standing silently near the edge of the garden, beneath a willow tree he once helped plant as a young volunteer. That man was me. And I wasn't just a guest. I was the ghost they buried too soon. But I had returned, not to haunt them with noise, but with silence and intent. For weeks, I had prepared quietly. No outbursts. No pleas. Just a steady stacking of dominoes. The ownership transfer had gone through 3 days earlier. The venue's original investors, tired of maintaining the old estate, were happy to sell their shares. The final paperwork landed on my desk at the law office of a friend whose father I once pulled from a burning car. Funny how the world comes back around when you live long enough. I made no public announcements. No demands. The venue manager was under strict instructions: proceed as usual. Let the wedding unfold without disturbance, until the precise moment I chose to reveal myself. Because dignity doesn't raise its voice. It waits. I spent the night before the wedding alone, walking the estate grounds, every step a memory. I traced the cobblestone path Lydia used to skip along when I brought her here for local events as a child. She once told me she wanted to get married somewhere magical. This was the place. I had unknowingly bought her childhood dream. And now I stood at its edge, invisible by design, with a plan that had nothing to do with revenge. I didn't want to ruin her day. I didn't even want to stop the wedding. I just wanted to exist in it. To remind her that I wasn't a ghost. That I hadn't disappeared. That I had only been silenced. And now, I had the pen again. There was a clause in the contract the coordinator had overlooked, one that allowed the owner of the estate to deliver a formal address if they wished. Tradition, apparently. A nod to the estate's past as a cultural hall. I instructed my attorney to notify the staff the morning of the wedding. Mr. Hayes will speak, the message read. 5 minutes. No disruption. They agreed. Because no one expected me to use it. But I would. Not to shame her. Not even to call her out. But to say the things a father should be allowed to say, even if it was the last time. That morning, while they rehearsed their vows, I sat in the side garden and pulled out the speech I had written by hand. Not a performance. Just a truth. I folded it neatly. Slid it into the inner pocket of my jacket. Then I walked the grounds like I belonged, because I did. I passed the kitchen, the music tent, the stacked crates of fine wine. A young worker asked if I was security. No, I said gently. I'm the owner. He blinked. Nodded. Didn't question it. Good. They didn't know what was coming. But it wasn't rage. It was reflection. Every man has a moment when he decides what kind of legacy he wants to leave. Mine wasn't going to be bitterness, nor vengeance. It was going to be presence. Real. Unshaken. Undeniable. Because no matter how much they dressed it up, rewrote the story, or edited me out, this place still remembered my hands. And soon, so would they. The quiet haunting. I didn't walk in like a storm. I entered like time itself, uninvited, quiet, and impossible to ignore. They were midway through the vows when I stepped under the arch of old oak branches lining the aisle. I could hear every word. Lydia's voice trembled slightly, not from fear, but from joy. The guests leaned forward, all dressed in the colors of wealth and legacy. The officiant smiled warmly, the kind of smile that pretends no one's missing. And yet, I was already there. I stood in the back, near the garden entrance, hands folded in front of me. Not hiding. Just waiting. The event coordinator noticed me first. Her face went pale. She whispered to the groom's father. The father turned. Eyes narrowed. Then widened. He started to move toward me, but the pianist missed a note, drawing attention back to the ceremony. Perfect. When the vows ended and applause erupted like the finale of a play, the coordinator whispered something to the officiant. He paused, confused, then gave a polite nod. A microphone was handed to him. "We'd like to honor a long-standing tradition of this estate," he said, clearing his throat. "The venue's owner has requested to say a few words before the reception." Lydia frowned. Whispered something to her husband. They both looked toward the coordinator. She pointed. "To me." Gasps moved through the guests like wind through wheat. Heads turned. Phones were lowered. I stepped forward, slowly, my shoes pressing into the perfect grass. I took the mic from the officiant without a word. Lydia's eyes locked on mine. No tears. Just stillness. "I won't keep you long," I said, my voice steady, shaped by years of silence and sacrifice. "I'm not here to disrupt. I'm here to remember." I looked around. At the garden. At the fountain. At the balcony where Lydia once stood at 10 years old, holding a paper crown, declaring herself queen of this place. "She dreamed of getting married here," I said. "She told me that once. Long before there were guest lists and dress codes. Long before life got complicated. Some shifted in their seats. The groom's mother reached for her pearls. I'm not here to make anyone uncomfortable. I just wanted to say. I'm proud. Proud that she made it. That she found someone. That she's here." I paused. And I wanted her to know that while I wasn't on the guest list, I was here. A ripple of tension moved through the crowd. Lydia lowered her eyes. "Because you see," I said, reaching into my coat, "this is my place now." I held up the deed, just briefly. "I own this estate. As of 3 days ago." Silence. No gasps. Just the weight of truth settling in. I didn't buy it to punish anyone. I bought it because I remembered the little girl who used to dream of magic. And I wanted to make sure she got it, even if she didn't want me in the picture. The groom started to say something. Lydia stopped him with a gentle hand. I turned to her. "I won't take up any more of your day. I just wanted you to hear it from me, Lydia, you were never alone. Even when you wanted to be." I handed the mic back to the officiant and stepped down. Not a word from the crowd. Just the wind, carrying the scent of roses I once taught her to prune. No applause. No protest. Just presence. I didn't stay for the reception. I didn't need to. My message had landed. Not as a thunderclap, but as a shadow stretched across the garden. A reminder that roots run deep, even when the branches forget. Tell me in the comments, if you were standing where I stood, would you have stayed silent, or would you have spoken your truth, no matter who it made uncomfortable? Truth cracks through. I didn't look back as I walked past the rows of stunned faces. I didn't need to. I'd made my presence felt, not with anger, not with accusation, but with something far more unsettling to the people who tried to forget me: calm truth. The kind of truth that settles into the corners of a room and doesn't leave when the music starts again. I made it halfway to the exit when I heard footsteps behind me. Fast, hesitant. Then, a voice, one I hadn't heard in over a year. "Dad, wait." I stopped, but I didn't turn around. Not right away. Then I felt her hand on my shoulder. Gentle. Shaking. "Why did you do this?" she asked, her voice cracking like thin glass. "Why today?" I finally turned. And there she was, Lydia. My daughter. In a dress that shimmered like moonlight, her eyes swollen with confusion, not rage. She didn't look angry. She looked small. Like the little girl who once scraped her knee and needed me to carry her home. "I did it," I said slowly, "because you left me no other way to be seen." Her lip quivered. "You think this was easy for me?" she whispered. You think I wanted this distance? Did you fight it? I asked, gently. When they looked at me like I was the stain on your new life, did you fight for me, Lydia? She didn't answer. And that silence, that was the answer. I sighed and looked out at the garden. Guests were beginning to stir again. The chatter was returning, the laughter trying to climb its way back up the walls. I wasn't trying to ruin your day, I said. I just wanted to remind you of who you are. And where you came from. Tears welled in her eyes now. I remember, you know, she whispered. That night you stayed with me in the hospital when I had pneumonia. You didn't sleep. You held my hand the whole time. Her voice broke. I remember everything, Dad. She stopped herself. I didn't know how to fit you into this version of my life. That was the truth. Raw. Honest. Painful. And I appreciated it more than all the false smiles she'd given me over the past few years. I never asked to fit in, I said. I just didn't want to be forgotten. She nodded, wiping her cheek. A beat of silence passed between us. Not empty. Not cold. Just full of everything unspoken. Behind her, the groom approached slowly. His face was tighter, guarded, careful. We didn't mean for this to hurt you, he said. We just thought. You thought I'd embarrass you, I finished for him. He didn't respond. I looked him in the eye. Not with malice. Just with history. With the weight of sleepless nights, unpaid bills, and a love that didn't vanish just because it made others uncomfortable. You love her? I asked. He nodded. Then don't rewrite her past to make her more palatable. Don't erase the man who carried her when no one else could. Lydia turned to him, and for the first time that day, he looked unsure. Like the balance had shifted. And it had. Because dignity doesn't come from money, or flowers, or curated guest lists. It comes from truth. And truth had finally cracked through the polished glass of that day, shining light into all the carefully hidden corners. I turned to leave again, slower this time. Dad, Lydia called out softly. I paused. Will you stay? Just for a little while? My back stiffened. I didn't answer right away. Because part of me wanted to. But another part of me, the part that had sat through birthdays alone and read lawyer letters over cold tea, that part wasn't ready to step back in so easily. I nodded once, but didn't turn around. I found a bench near the fountain and sat there, quietly, as the celebration resumed. I wasn't part of the performance. But I was no longer invisible. The day I came back. I sat on that stone bench like a man watching a dream he no longer wanted to wake up from. Children chased bubbles across the lawn. Waiters passed by with sparkling flutes of champagne. The air was heavy with music and perfume and curated joy. But beneath it all, something had shifted, and I could feel it in my bones. I wasn't supposed to be here. Not by their plans. But fate had its own schedule. For the first time in years, Lydia wasn't performing. She wasn't curating her image for polished company. She kept glancing toward me from the dance floor, unsure whether to smile or cry. The groom, bless his discomfort, tried to act like nothing had happened. But I could see the unease behind his grin. That subtle awareness that the man sitting alone near the fountain could dismantle the entire illusion with just one story. But I didn't come to destroy anything. I came to restore something. My own dignity. Later, just before the cake cutting, one of the groom's uncles approached me. Slicked back hair, expensive cufflinks, the kind of handshake that feels like a transaction. I'll admit, he said, you've got nerve, Mr. Hayes. No, I replied, I've got memory. He chuckled uncomfortably and walked away. I stayed right where I was. I didn't need a dance. I didn't need a toast. I just needed the sun to set on a truth that had finally been spoken. As guests filtered into the reception hall, Lydia slipped away. I saw her through the window, walking toward the garden. She approached me slowly, like a daughter unsure if her father would still open his arms. She didn't speak at first. She just sat beside me. Then she said, "You scared me today." "How?" I asked. "By showing up?" "No," she whispered. "By reminding me what I threw away." That silence between us was heavier than any argument. She took something from her dress pocket. A tiny piece of paper, folded 3 times. She handed it to me. I opened it slowly. It was the Father's Day card I thought I'd lost, the one with glitter and stick figures. The words, "Best Dad Ever," still smudged, but intact. "I kept it," she said. "All these years." I felt a pressure rise in my chest. Not pain. Not sadness. Just weight. Generations of love and disappointment coiled tight in that moment. "I don't know how to fix this," she said. "But I don't want to pretend anymore." I looked at her. My daughter. Not the bride. Not the woman trying to belong to someone else's world. Just, my Lydia. "Then don't," I said. "Start by telling the truth. About where you come from. About who helped you stand before you learned to walk." She nodded. Slowly. Sincerely. The music from inside grew louder. They were announcing the first dance. She stood up and looked at me. "Will you stay a little longer?" "No," I said. "But not because I'm angry." She looked confused. "I've said what I came to say," I explained. "And I've been seen. That's enough for one day." She stepped forward and hugged me. Tight. The way she used to. The way only a daughter can. "I'm sorry, Dad." "I know," I whispered. "Just don't let that apology be the end. Let it be the beginning." She nodded again. And I walked away. Not because I was unwanted. Not because I was ashamed. But because I had finally reclaimed what was taken from me in silence. My place in her story. Subscribe if you believe dignity doesn't come from money or power, but from standing your ground when others try to erase you. Would you have walked away, or stayed until the last dance? Tell me below. The last light in the window. It's strange how quiet the house felt when I returned that evening. Not the kind of empty that echoes. Just, settled. Like the silence was no longer heavy, just familiar. I hung up my jacket. Folded the tie. Ran my fingers over the old photo of Mary on the hallway table. She used to tell me, when you feel like a ghost, do something that reminds the world you're still breathing. Well, I did. And I left that wedding with more than just a story. I left with my head high. The venue sale went through without a hitch. The very place where I was once unwelcome now had my name etched into its foundation, quietly, legally, permanently. I didn't hold on to it out of spite. A week later, I donated the property to a foundation that hosts events for foster children and single parents. People who know what it means to be forgotten and still show up. I never told Lydia. Not because I wanted to keep it from her. But because some acts speak louder in silence. We've spoken a few times since that day. Not often. Not always easily. But there's less pretending now. She sends photos sometimes. A Sunday lunch here and there. It's not perfect. But it's real. That's enough. A few nights ago, I found myself sitting in the garden, the same one Lydia used to run through with her arms stretched like wings. The roses have overgrown, and the stones are cracked, but it still holds something sacred. A place where love was sown, and time never really washed it away. A light flickered in the kitchen window behind me. The last one I turn off before bed. That's when it hit me. I'm not waiting anymore. Not for a call. Not for a thank you. Not for permission to matter. I lived a life full of sacrifice. I gave everything I had to raise a girl into a woman the world could respect. And even when that same world told her I wasn't part of the picture, I reminded her that I was the frame. No, I didn't get to walk her down the aisle. But I walked her through storms, heartbreaks, scraped knees, and lonely winters. I stood through courtrooms and clinics and choir recitals. And when everyone else came and went, I stayed. That's fatherhood. Not a title. A commitment. And maybe one day, if she has a child of her own, she'll understand what it means to be the first one there, and the last one remembered. But that's her path now. Mine is this, peace. Not the kind you beg for. The kind you earn. I still keep that Father's Day card in my drawer. Not for nostalgia. But for proof. Proof that love was real. That sacrifice meant something. That no matter how invisible the world tried to make me, I was always there. A man may age, his hands may shake, his knees may fail, but his love, it doesn't rust. It doesn't retire. It waits. And when the moment is right, it speaks. With dignity. With truth. With the weight of 1,000 unsaid things finally finding air. So if you ask me now, was it worth it? Yes. Because I didn't just show up to a wedding. I came back from the dead. And the last light in my window still shines, not for who I used to be, but for the man I chose to remain. Still standing. Still breathing. Still me.